Okay. And Joe, you mentioned you want to record. I don't mind at all. About the object. Okay. And will you be able to upload it to the? They have an email link. Uh, a server can activate, can upload it there too.
I don't think our opposition team is here.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there they are. Never mind.
Okay. Okay, cool. Joe, if you can go ahead and record and upload it, that would be great.
Judges, do you need the speaker order?
Speak order. Accordingly, will be carb side first. 7 minutes.
Like I'm just gonna, my partner Calvin Pan will be the first speaker for side
Oh,
government.
okay.
Yeah, and me, Eric Sun, will be the second speaker for side governments.
Okay. Hold on. Kevin on Loomis High School will be first speaker. Okay, Calvin. Okay. And on Campbell High School, who will be the first speaker?
Speaking first and third, my name is David Dumonte, and then second speaker is going to be Daniel Dumonte.
Okay, great. Okay, and I assume you guys will count your own timer as well, and I will monitor and in general I give you a 30 seconds grace time. So if I see you run out of time, I raise my hand. You kind of know you are about the time. So just wrap it up. Okay. If no more problem, let's go ahead and start. The first speaker will be Garb side.
Sounds good. So
yeah.
Can everybody hear me? Yes.
Yeah, just a quick question though. How do you want us to do POIs?
You can do them verbally.
Perfect.
Right. So verbal POIs, human pronouns. Everybody ready? Yes. All right. Then without further ado, I'll start speaking in 3, 2, 1. I go to Connecticut private high school, Loomis Chaffee, where the median family income is probably in the high 6 digits. Even the name by itself probably sounds French and snobbish, so you have an idea of just how privileged the school is. Many of my peers have private admissions consultants who advise them that the best way to get into colleges is to create their own charity organizations and also have infinite funds to pour into said organizations. It's those rich and privileged kids who often get into the Harvards of the world, the Ivy Leagues, despite not working as hard as some other people, despite not being bright, they get in because they have this advantage. For people who don't have said advantages, like me, it's simply unfair that people can create said organizations and not actually benefit the communities around them. Many of those organizations are simply shell fictions. They're not actually contributing to communities around them. They're not actually doing much because they're just there, a name on a paper, on an application that advantages only the rich and powerful. And for this reason, that I am in strong support of this resolution, that college admissions should not factor into the development of charity organizations by high school students. So I'm going to be doing a couple things in this speech on side government, right? First of all, I'm going to go over some definitions and what the scope of today's debate actually is. Then I'm going to move on to the status quo and just analyzing like what actually happens in the status quo. And finally, moving on to our 3 constructive contentions on side government, right? So first of all, talking on definitions, right? So first of all, we're just going to define college admissions pretty simplistically as a process by which colleges decide which students get admitted to their institutions. We're going to define development of charity organizations as a creation of a charity organization. Students can still participate in charity organizations that they themselves hadn't created and get rewarded for that on their college applications. We think the scope of this debate should be limited to, just people making their own organizations, since it's much more problematic. We think charity and high schoolers working in it is a pretty good thing. And we think factor, as like colleges will not view students developing charity organizations as a plus on their application. So if students list an organization that they themselves create and as an extracurricular on their common app, admission officers will just ignore it. This doesn't mean that high school students will be prohibited from creating charity organizations. They just won't be rewarded for doing so on their college applications, right? So let's be really clear. The scope of this debate is students creating or managing organizations. If a student works for a larger organization with external accountability, this is not the development of an organization, thus not within today's debate, right? So moving on to talk about the status quo, right? Really simply, who are the high schoolers creating those organizations, right? So first of all, we see those people often have the goal of admissions for college, right? it's far more common that people like create charity organizations as high schoolers for the purposes of college admissions, and oftentimes those people will actually benefit the community as a whole, right? Because charity organizations are very easily created and very hard to prove that they actually exist. I'll take you in a second, right? So this looks like people with rich consulting firms setting students up with large nonprofits without the students actually doing anything, and students from impoverished communities and not being able to actually do this since they don't have the same resources, right? And fundamentally also, we also see that the communities that they actually claim to help are not actually benefiting from the organization, because the primary benefit is the person setting up the charity, not the community as a whole, because they don't have that altruistic motive, right? And we tell you that like sometimes, sure, yeah, there are people like definitely setting up charity organizations for the benefit of the community, but this happens regardless on our side of the house, since those students are not driven by the motive of college, right? Secondly, the student can also engage with a pre-existing charity on either side of the house. Since in the status quo, this charity span basically every field. They have education charities, poverty charities, environment, international relations, humanitarian aid, etc. And students can freely engage in those outside of the context of college admissions and creating their own organization on either side of the house. Yes.
Okay, so going back for a minute to your definitions, we get a definition of the development of charity. How do you specifically define the word develop?
We're just going to define it as like, creating an organization, or like taking some sort of like high managerial role in like another organization created by a high school student or like, a college student for purposes of admissions. I think that should be clear enough. If you have any questions, we can you can definitely bring that up in your speech. But moving on to contentions, right? So we think that the three most so on government, we have three constructive contentions for you. Number one, authenticity. Number two, practical outcomes. Number three, equity, right? So first of all, I'll talk about number one, authenticity, right? We think that it's very important that people create charity organizations so that their goal is actually to help the communities around them, right? That's the spirit of charity. That's the spirit of like actually altruistic helping people. We think that when you have an organization that's created for the purpose of taking advantage of the noble goal of charity for your own self-benefit, for college admissions, not only is that immoral to some extent, we also think it's a harmful practice, right? Just think that, like, those people are going to be like, the students graduating into like, college, going to the workplace, etc. We want them to have stringent ideals, like what's right or wrong, and to not exploit charitable causes for their own self-benefit, right? We don't think that's a value we should be imposing on society as a whole and our high schoolers, so we should discourage this practice for that reason, right? Condition number two is practical outcomes, right? We think that fundamentally there are several things that mark a small charity organization created by a high schooler, right? Number one is that they're small, right? A student only has 1 to 4 years of time in setting up those organizations, and thus they'll have the outreach of an established organization that has many years of experience, not to mention like, experience dealing with established HR managers, like, established legal funds, etc., like a known outreach network, etc. So those organizations are small and often have no impact, right? On top of that, those organizations often have no accountability, right? We think that when students manage or found their own charity, there's no check to ensure that charity actually does any work, right? Contrast that against established charities who track hours, progress, and the level of student engagement. So organizations like UNICEF, Roots and Shoots, and Amnesty International, right? Number three, we tell you that large organizations have more impact in general, right? Because of the same reasons like we mentioned before. They have more time to like actually establish relations with the communities around them. They have more, just ability to actually engage in impactful work, right? So basically, like on our side of the house, if you pass this resolution, students will actually tend to join those large existing charities, meaning that students will actually benefit the communities around them much more, right? So the impact of this is, number one, that while this resolution will no doubt reduce the number of student-created charity organizations, this won't be much of a loss in communities, because we've told you that organizations created by high school schoolers are often not actually active. They're just created for the purposes. But barring that, like, even if we think that they're like, the best, have the best intentions, actually want to help people, they're small organizations that actually can't really get much funding, right? Number two, we tell you that in fact this will be better for communities because students have the ability and incentive to actually join existing organizations and contribute more in those regards, and that would be more effective of like, using their volunteer hours to actually cause outreach, right? And my partner Eric will very briefly touch on the argument of equity, which is essentially that, like, people should people like this should be implemented to not give rich students an unfair advantage in the admissions process. So for all the reasons above, Judge, please vote for propositions debate, ban the creation of charity organizations for the purposes of college admissions solely. Thank you.
All right, so just for the other team, I will be on a separate document, so if you could vocalize POIs, that'd be amazing. Without further ado, let's get right into this. We negate today's resolution. College admissions should not factor into the development, should not factor the development of charity organizations by high school students. We're going to start on the definitional level of today's debate, as it's crucial to the entirety of today's round. The affirmation gives you this definition of development of charity as the creation of charity by high school students. Though it is in some way the creation of charity, it's not just limited to the creation of charity. If the resolution asked us to specifically discuss the creation of charity events, it wouldn't have used the word development, it would have used the word creation. We interpret today's resolution as such. In addition to the creation of charities by a small select percentage of people, it means that a majority of people are actively participating in charity. The development of a charity organization not only means its creation, but it means the growth and the upkeep of an organization. In order to develop something, it's not just the creation of it. That's a fundamental misunderstanding by side affirmation. But let's move on to what we provide as our counter definition before we move on to case. So, what do we mean when we say the development of charity organizations? In addition to the creation of organizations, we define the development of charity organizations as a high school student volunteering time to help forward the goal of a charity organization, whether it be through volunteering, managing, or other. Note that financial donations are not classified as development of charity organizations. Specifically in that definition, something crucial is the idea of forwarding a charity. If you forward the charity, then that is a development of charity. As I'm done with the definitions, I'll take it POI.
Yeah, do you think it's defensible for us in Gov to argue that, that colleges just shouldn't reward charity work in general and should just, disregard that on an application? Why do you think that's defensible for us on Gov?
I think it's incredibly defensible because look at what you guys presented as your speech, right? In your speech, you define development as the creation of charities. We obviously recognize that a select small percentage of people are actually capable of doing that, and thus that provides no ground for negation in today's debate. In order to have a debate, we have to see both the creation of charity and the upkeep or development of them. So we provide equal ground in neg world. Let's move on to our principled framework, or the value of today's round. Because we believe charity as a factor in admissions better develops morally sound individuals and strong communities, the value of strong communities should be the judging criterion for today's debate. Thus, what's our first contention? We look at the benefit to the students. Our first layer of analysis, it builds understanding. Helping out a charity provides invaluable understanding to the students. By selflessly helping others, you get an understanding of situations which might not directly concern you. For example, by volunteering at a food bank, you learn about food insecurity and the importance of nutrition. By volunteering at a blood drive, you have the ability to save a life with your own blood, building a connection between you and a hospital patient, somebody who is ill. By volunteering at a beach cleanup, you learn the importance of preserving our environment. Volunteering strengthens ties to communities and broadens support networks, exposing you to people with common interests, neighboring resources, and fun and fulfilling activities. By building community, volunteering at charity organizations fosters understanding with those who you might never interact with. Such a connection is only possible because you are developing charity organizations. Our second layer of analysis under this point, fulfillment. People feel good when they donate time and give to others. Multiple studies have shown the mental health benefits of donating time and helping others, such as reduced anxiety, stress, combating depression, and boosting self-confidence. These are amazing benefits that come, and the fulfillment that you gain from charity is undoubted. Our second layer of analysis, our second contention, benefit to society. Our first layer of analysis under this point is helping others. Charitable nonprofits embody the best of America. They provide a way for people to work together for the common good, transforming shared beliefs and hopes into action. They give shape to our boldest dreams, highest ideals, and noblest causes. America has almost 1.3 million charitable nonprofits that feed, heal, shelter, and educate, inspire our citizenship. Charity is a benefit to society. As our second layer analysis under this point says, there's a massive uptick in charity because there's incentive for people to actually participate in charity. What are the impacts of this? What are the impacts of there being incentive for youth and high school students to do charity work? Because they go out into life with an understanding of how come charity actually matters so much. What this means is that they find a new mindset and And when they go out into their later parts of life, their greater education, their careers, and even their life as a whole, they will be more charitable and they're more willing to donate, encourage, and volunteer later on in life. Before I move on to refutations, I can take your POI.
Okay, so how do you believe that all these people who are doing charity for the sole purpose of college admissions are somehow going to foster this sense of fulfillment or embody the best of America?
I'm so glad you asked that question because it's quite simple. Yes, they might first do it for college admissions. We completely agree with that sentiment, but that's not the outcome. The outcome is never, oh, I did it for college admissions, I'm done. What actually is true, what is the truth of the scenario is that college students gain an understanding, gain an appreciation, and gain, most importantly, like we say in our C1, an understanding of how our world and charity organizations actually work. That is of crucial importance in today's debate. The only side that develops stronger students, a stronger community, is a side opposition, because we're the only side that incentivizes the average college or average high school student to actually go out in the world and participate in charity. Now let's move on to a couple of refutations. I've already spent a little bit of time on definitions, but I want to reiterate something. We're discussing as development of charity both the creation and process of keeping up a charity. That's essential in today's debate. The entirety of Neg's case relies on the fact that they have only creation. They have only this creation idea, but it's not just creation, as we say. Development, if you just check this argument yourself, Judge, no thank you. If you check this argument, just think about it. When you think of the word development, it's not just the creation. It's the active upkeep. It's the active development. It's the active going of a charity. No, thank you. So now let's move on to a couple of more refutations. They tell you in the status quo, the people who are have access to these organizations or creating these organizations are a select few privileged individuals. But they give you no metric as to why this is such a big issue. They tell you it's an issue that people can create organizations, or it's an issue that that only the rich can do it. But they don't tell you how big this issue actually is. We can't quantify if it's 1 person, 2 people, 10 people. They don't tell you this, thus their impact is completely stricken from the flow. Now let's move on to their contention on authenticity. They tell you, oh, it's not authentic because they're not doing it for the right reasons. First, we tell you this isn't true. They're going to do it they do it for college admissions, but additionally, they gain a new understanding. But additionally, colleges aren't dumb. Colleges have an understanding of what students are thinking, and they can see when somebody's being disingenuous and when somebody's actually committed to their charity work. It's for this reason that they're able to weed out those bad charities or simply created for admissions, and they're able to look at, say, a privileged individual who's doing it just for college and has no actual tangible impact, and weigh how they are actually just doing it for college. Colleges aren't dumb. Colleges are smart, and they can see the impact and the benefit that comes from charity. For all these reasons, we cannot urge a negation ballot anymore.
If everybody can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, my time starts now. Judge, in my speech, I first go over this definition debate before going over some brief rebuttals and then rebuilding our side of the house. But first of all, on this idea of what development is. Judge, let me ask you a very simple rhetorical question. If you work at McDonald's, are you developing McDonald's? It's a very separate concept of working for a larger agency than developing that agency fundamentally. We already told you that developmentally, it means 2 things, right? They seem to narrow it down, say that we basically say it's only funding agencies. But we told you that there's 2 things that kind of developmenting. 1 is that you found a new agency, and 2 is that you take up some high-level managerial position in the agency. That is to say, you help its active expansion on the managerial scale. You're not simply just working for it, right? We think there's a clear distinction between simply working for charity versus developmenting charity in the long term. And that distinction is very important in this debate. And that distinction is why we believe that side government ultimately takes this case. So fundamentally, I first go over the opponent side and go over their basically 2 contentions, right? First, they tell you that it benefits the student themselves. And second of all, they tell you it benefits the best of, or like embodies the best of America because charity is good. Judge, I think we both agree on either side of the house that charity is good. We think we both agree that on either side of the house, when somebody actively engages with charity, that develops character, that develops people's goals, that develops people's positive intentions, and that quote unquote embodies the best of America. But I think what we differ on here against side opposition is the fact that we don't believe that a student-ran charity, that where the student is the manager, where the student has no accountability to what they actually do, is actually beneficial. They tell you that we have no warrant, so I'll just give you one. My best friend, from Shanghai, runs this internet program called learntoprogram.com. You can search it up. It's basically a charity that helps over 30 quote unquote schools in China learn to code, and he got into Stanford this year, also Princeton and Johns Hopkins. But also, let me tell you that charity has done fundamentally nothing in the last 2 years, and he just set up the website and it contacted the schools and he gave him a yes answer.
Why?
Simply the matter of the fact here is that these large institutions, that the large consulting firms, that so many rich, privileged people resort to these large charities and the creation of charities as a core mechanism to get these kids into college, especially if these kids are not academically qualified in a traditional sense. That is to say, Judge, there's incredible incentive for rich parents, for rich students in the status quo to actively engage with these malicious practices and to get into college. Second of all, I'll tell you that these colleges, don't let them tell you that these colleges can quote unquote see through the student's application, right? They really take a very naive approach at this. We think that colleges fundamentally look at a student's application for not that long of time, and that is to say that these positions of creating charities, quote unquote, or these positions of starting large organizations or developing large organizations are fundamentally very impactful but fundamentally very impactful to the student's resume. That is to say, on their side of the house, they have to defend a world in which rich students and rich parents can simply pay their children into college by helping and setting them up with these large positions at creating quote unquote charities that don't physically or actively do anything. That's to say, that's incredibly unfair. When I tell you we have not impacted this out, I think quote that my partner in this last speech explicitly said why this was unfair to the average students. That when the rich are able to stay rich and perpetrate this cycle by sending their kids into these prestigious quote unquote colleges, and when these individuals are able to continue to perpetrate this cycle of wealth, when poor people cannot actually afford to engage with these programs, and that's incredibly harmful to the fairness of the admission cycle, right? Then let's go with the opponent's second contention, which is the idea that, well, it quote unquote embodies the best of America. Judge, what does that mean? I'm asking the POI if these people are doing charities for the sole purpose of getting into college, if that really embodies the best of America. They said that, well, no, but these people, quote unquote, develop character by being in these charities. First of all, how do you develop character by being in a charity and when you don't actually benefit anybody on the ground? As to say, when it's a student-run or student-managed charities, it's much harder to actually help individuals. That is to say, you must first form these connections, right? If I'm a student, I want to create a charity, or I want to develop, or I want to expand a charity, who do I connect? Am I supposed to just call a bunch of local public schools that want to help them? We think it's fundamentally infeasible. We said that if a student just joins a larger organization that's externally managed, then they can help individuals more. As to say, on the comparative, on our side of the house, we said the student actually connects with a wider range of people, and therefore we kind of co-opt all these benefits that they claim about why charity is good, right? We think charity is better on our side of the house when a student can actually prove that they do the charity, when a student can actually engage with the individuals that this charity is quote unquote actually helping. We think on that side, we co-opt all these benefits that they tell you that charity is quote unquote good. Before I go to our side of the house, I can predict the opponent will actually do a very giant rebuttal shout against why developmental means that, well, people can still participate in these charities. Judge, we think there's a very separate distinction between developing and working for an organization. Developing means the active extension of an organization, and the opponent has conceded to that in the definition of developing, right? But how do you extend an organization if you're simply working in it? A person who flips burgers at McDonald's isn't expanding McDonald's. It's the managers that are expanding McDonald's. It's the people who are actually causing McDonald's to spread and proliferate. We say there's a very clear distinction and very clear line we have to draw here. And we believe that all positions that are inherent to the expansion of a charity are managerial positions, not people working on the ground. That's to say, these are positions that are fundamentally unaccountable in the status quo, but also fundamentally carry the quote-unquote most prestige in the status quo. And that is why the incentive here is fundamentally harmful. Now to our side of the case, we tell you that there's little authenticity in organizations, right? They claim to you all these great benefits of people engaging with it. That example is the best in America. But we tell you when the goal of engaging with these organizations is for the simple fact of getting you into college, we don't think that's authentic at all. We don't really think that these people care for the people that they're quote unquote helping, even if they do get down and help these people, because at the end of the day, they're not thinking about this. They're probably it's very likely to dump these charities the second they get into college, because the goal to their means is not to help people on the ground, but to help themselves. And we think that as long as that holds, that the student doesn't actually get any of these benefits, because simply just going through the motions when they're doing these charity organizations instead of actively connecting and caring for the people that they're actively helping. Second of all, we tell you that there's little and no accountability, and that's a practical outcome. The matter of fact is that all these student-led and developed charities are small because these students are young and they don't have the connections that an established organization has. These students don't actually have, when a student wants to fund a charity or expand it, they have to call people who are less likely to listen to them than an established person working in a non-profit. We simply think that if a student joins a large organization like UNICEF, Roots and Shoots, or Amnesty International, then they can actively help the community more because of the established connections that are already present in place. Second of all, we believe that a student extending or Second of all, we believe that therefore the funding and managing of these smaller, nonprofits or these smaller charity organizations are fundamentally bad because of lack of accountability. That's to say, a student can just claim they do anything, and there's no way to fact check it. While on the other hand, larger organizations like UNICEF, Roots and Shoots, they check hours that the student volunteers for. They check what the student actually does. They check if they're actually helping the communities in place. Judge, that is accountability. We think a college should care more about the authenticity of what a student is actually doing than the simple fact that a student funds his charity more, which is a simple, unfortunate truth in today's society, that the rich students in the status quo are able to fund charities that nobody cares about, that doesn't do anything, but colleges buy into aggressively. We think that is incredibly regretful. Third of all, I like to talk about the equity that's unfair that's present. We've already talked about this enough. But Judge, the opponent doesn't seem to buy the fact that this actually happens in the status quo. So I tell you that both me and Calvin actually run charities. But second of all, I'd like to tell you that both of these organizations are fundamentally more marginal than larger scale charities. The opponent thinks that nobody actually quote unquote creates charities. So that's really a false paradigm here. As a student in like a quote unquote very rich, private school, we see like a vast majority of my classmates either owns a charity, operates a charity. One even operates one in Vietnam. People operate international level charities only for the sake of getting into college. It's a simple matter of the fact in the status quo is that people find this loophole of founding agencies that have little accountability. And a simple matter of the fact is that this is unfair to the poor students who don't have this equitable opportunities. As regretful as it is, we find it better in a world which people actively have to work for the charity, which has external accountability, which people have to work for a charity, which the work can be fact-checked, which people have to actively work for a charity that actually benefits the people on the ground instead of just making wild claims because they themselves are the sole leader and they themselves are the sole reporter of the facts of what the charity does. And with that, I'm so proud to stand in proposition on our side of the house. Thank you.
All right, so just for quick off-time roadmap, going to be going over framework definitions, then I'm going to be going down the negations case, the affirmations case, then I'm going to be going down our case. Again, any POIs, just vocalize them whenever it's not productive time. I'll probably take 2 to 3 at most. So on my first word. Hello, judges. My name is Daniel Duente, second negation speaker on the debate. The college admissions should not factor in the development of charity organizations by high school students. So first, let's talk about the debate on the definition of development. The most fair definition of development is the creation and continuing growth of a charity organization. And why is this true? Let's look at it in a couple ways. The first way is which is best for both teams. If we're only looking at development as the creation, then obviously the resolution is weighted towards affirmation because there's no way for the negation to say that, there's no way for the negation to say that the creation of charity organizations, only the creation, is a good thing. But however, if we're saying both the creation and development, that means people volunteering, giving their time to help a charity organization counts as development, then it's evenly weighted because we both have the creation and individual people developing the organization. However, let's look at their McDonald's point. They bring up this example of McDonald's saying like, well, if you flip burgers for McDonald's at minimum wage, are you developing McDonald's? We have a couple of responses. The first is that this is a flawed analogy because McDonald's is a job. You do not volunteer at charity in order to get money. That is not what charity is for. So from the very beginning, it is a flawed understanding. However, moving on to how it actually proves our case, that worker, yes, they're being compensated, but they are helping to develop McDonald's. Why is this true? Because McDonald's does not exist without the worker. The organization, the company, whatever you may call it, cannot exist without the individual. Whatever their job is, whatever they are doing, the company, if they did not have them, if they don't have the people working for them, cannot exist. So use this against them. Turn this to our side. Do not let them say that, just because you do something at a company doesn't mean you're developing it. If you if you volunteer for a charity, if you help forward the goal of a charity, if you donate blood at a blood drive, you are helping that charity. You are forwarding that charity's goal, that initiative. You are helping people. Definitionally, you are developing that charity. You are helping it grow. You are helping it achieve its goal. Let's look at a butterfly. Okay, the creation of the butterfly, the egg on the leaf, that counts as development. That's the creation. The cocoon, when the butterfly is developing, that is also development. That is the developing of the butterfly, going from caterpillar to butterfly. Just because something is not the creation does not automatically mean that it is not development. So now let's move on to a couple of refutations. They say that there's no accountability. That people creating their own charities have no accountability. But we have two responses. The first is that if a college really wants a student at their school, especially in Ivy League, as you've said, if a college really wants a student, they're going to investigate them. They're not just going to look over the report, see a charity and say, oh my God, they're such a good person, they created a charity, I want them. If they really want the best of the best at their school, which the colleges do, they don't want second-rate people. They want everybody who's at the top of their field at their school, then they're going to investigate. They're going to see the nuances. If they investigate the organization and see, well, yes, it's more of a shell company, they don't actually do anything, or it was created 5 months before the application, they haven't actually helped anyone, they're going to see that. Judges, do not let the affirmation come up here and say that colleges will be blindsided by this. But secondly, let's look at college equity. Colleges all across the nation, including Ivy Leagues, such as Harvard and Stanford and Yale, have said that they're no longer requiring the SAT and the ACT. What this signals is that they realize that people who are richer, people who can afford the ability to get tutors to do better on their standardized tests, they're not going to favor them over people who cannot afford that. What does this mean, and how does this cross apply? This shows the mentality that the colleges see that not everybody has the same upbringing. The colleges recognize that people with more money are automatically at a better advantage, but they're not blind. They're not blind in that sense. They see that and they acknowledge that and they take that into account. Do not let the affirmation tell you otherwise. And now to move on, they say that, well, small organizations don't work. And well, okay, this might be true, but it's not really a big point. And we ask the affirmation one simple question: how many small student-created, let's say by the very rich college or high school students, how many charity organizations have there been made? How many high school students are making their own shell corporations, let's call them? They don't give us a number. They tell us, oh my God, it's this big issue. Oh my God, it's going to lead to the collapse of America because it's not equitable, because it's not fair for everyone. But they don't give us any numbers. They don't give us any way to quantify it. They tell us it's this doom and gloom situation where it's not going to be fair for anybody, but they don't tell us how many people are actually doing it. Like our first speaker said, is it one person creating it? Is it 10 people? Is it 100 people? We don't know. And insofar as they have not given us the number of people who are actually creating these organizations and have not quantified how big of an issue it actually is, then they cannot bring it up in their last speech, because that would be unfair to the rules of parliamentary debate. They have lost the round on that and that alone. So moving on, let's turn their third contention about that big corporation or big charities can engage more. They say that it's better to work for a big corporation because you know that it'll work. And you know what? That's actually helpful for our side, because they completely ignore. Let's just make up a hypothetical that the 95% of people who cannot create their own organizations will volunteer at a blood drive, will volunteer at a food drive, at a food bank, will volunteer at a beach cleanup. They completely ignore the people who they're not going to create their own organizations because they don't have the money for it, but they're still going to volunteer anyways. Not once in any of their speeches have they brought up the fact that people are volunteering in droves. They're not creating their own organizations, but they're still developing the organizations. They're still helping those charities. They completely ignore the people who are volunteering for those organizations. Moving on to our case, to our first contention about understanding. They say that student-run charities don't work, but they only give us anecdotal information. Anybody can make up a story about their friend creating an organization to get into an Ivy League. Okay, that is not a solid story. Just because you say it's true doesn't mean it's true. And that is one example. Give us 10, give us 100, give us 1,000, give us 30,000 examples. They have not given us a single number in the entirety of their case, and as such, we cannot quantify the impact of their evidence. Moving on to our second contention about benefits to society. They say that students do it just to get into college. The response is that regardless of what the impetus of it, yes, maybe I'm going to go volunteer because I know it'll look good on my record, but I still volunteer. The impact of me donating blood is still saving a life, regardless of the motivation. But furthermore, countless studies have shown, and this has gone unrefuted, that people who volunteer once are more inclined to volunteer again and again and again. Not only because they see the benefit on others that it has, but because it benefits themselves. People are less anxious, they're less depressed, they feel better about themselves, and it helps every single person. Then they say, well, if you don't benefit, you're not going to do it. But again, they ignore the majority of people. They ignore the majority of people who are doing it. Not everyone's going to be able to create an organization, but almost every single person is going to be able to donate a couple hours of their life to help a blood drive, to help a food bank. Then they say, well, there's not any organizations for people. It's not actually easy for people to do. They ignore our 1.3 million statistic, that there are 1.3 million charitable organizations. And as such, as we have proven, that their case is fundamentally flawed, and they provide no substantive analysis on which we can view their impact. That is why we win this case. And our third speaker is going to pick up where I left off.
All right, so picking up at the beginning where my partner just left off, starting on my first word. All right, at the crux of today's debate, as we started in Neg 1 and as was talked just in Neg 2, is the definitional debate. The affirmation gives you the question of McDonald's. Is a worker at McDonald's helping in the development of McDonald's? They are. Don't let them dissuade you, Judge. A worker is still helping in the development of an organization. One volunteer is still helping in the development of a charity. Simply because they don't own the charity, simply because they don't have the most money to flash around, doesn't mean they aren't doing anything. That's completely disingenuous and to say. A worker has just as much tie-in to development of an agency as the owner does. Yes, it may not be on the same scale, but at the same time, it is still that same development. Look at the definition we provide to you at the top of case, Judge. We tell you that any definition you look out there on the internet is going to tell you the creation and active growth of an organization, or creation and active growth of an individual. If you look at the development of a human, we don't just talk about the conception of a human. We talk about the active development of traits like hearing, sight, sound, pain, feeling, like all those things. We don't look at just the creation. If we were just looking at the creation when we were discussing development, then we would be having such a limited debate. Let's expand our debate. Let's expand it so it's actually fair for both sides to debate. But why is it fair for both sides to debate? And why is it the most fair definition in today's debate? It's the most fair definition because we allow the affirmations to still gain their impact of these privileged few and those who are able to create, but we also allow ourselves to have actually some say in those who do not have the ability to create, those who are simply able to volunteer. Additionally, let's move into our second point on why the affirmation took this definition and did the opposite or did not complete their burden in today's debate. They provide you this story of a privileged individual, somebody who has the ability to create an organization. But again, they give you no metric. We get stories about somebody in Shanghai, classmates who are able to do organizations in Vietnam. But at the same time, that is no metric. That's simply an anecdote. We ask how widespread is this issue actually? How much of an issue is this actually? And this is going to be a huge issue in voters in just a second. Third, before we get into voters, let's discuss this privilege argument. Colleges are not dumb. We're talking about some of the most respected, oldest institutions in the country. They're going to see disingenuous action, people who simply are doing charity work for just college admissions and not actually have any impact, and vote them down, just like you should vote down the affirmation in today's debate. But now, let's move on to the voters in today's round. 3 things: scope, magnitude, and certainty. How do we on the negation tie in better to scope? Simply put, we are talking about the majority, not the minority. The limit of affirmation's impact is such, they only discuss the minority of people who have the ability to create charities. That they don't quantify how small this minority is or how large this minority is, but in the end of the day, it's still the minority, it's still the select few, it's still the 1% or the 1% of the 1%. Whereas we in the negation provide you the scope of all high school students. We include the development at any level, whether it be simply donating blood, whether it be managing a school bake sale, whether it be moving up and even creating your own agency. We on the affirmation allow for scalable scope and include all high school students, not just a select few. But second, let's move on to magnitude. Who's actually enacting the most change? The only side which incentivizes the average the average high schooler to actually go out and do change and look back to our value where we discuss community difference. The only side that actually as community difference is the negation in today's debate, because we're the only side that incentivizes the 95%, the 99% to actually go out and act and not just the 1%. Lastly, let's talk about certainty. We are certain that high schoolers are going to act, are going to do something if they can write it down on their college resume. If they're unable to write down the development of an agency, like we say, or a development of a charity in their college admissions, they're not going to do it. The only way you can ensure this impact is if you vote negation in today's debate.
Right, so can everybody hear me? Yes. All right, then without further ado, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Embodying the best of America is not incentivizing our high schoolers to pursue charity for corrupt purposes, helping others for the sake of self-interest, a higher score on an admissions report. Embodying the best of America is not rewarding our youth for lying, falsifying their supposedly charitable activities to get into college. Embodying the best of America is not unfairly privileging the already privileged in the college admissions process, rewarding rich students with a wealth of charity opportunities available to them on the admissions process, while punishing poor students without equal access to those opportunities. America is a land of meritocracy, freedom, and equality. America should not mean a broken system where the gates of higher education, of opportunity and access to a better life, are more open to the rich than to the poor, even when both work equally hard. America should not mean a system where colleges were the unethical, the immoral, the falsifiers of the world. America should not mean college admissions factoring the development of charity organizations by high school students. Very proud to support this. Very, very proud to be on government. First of all, for the final time, let's talk about this word development. Let's talk about this whole definitions debate that's really defined the course of today's debate, right? Government tells you that development is an active contribution to the charity's activities, which means the creation and managing of a charity organization. Opposition, meanwhile, contests this and tells you that developing is just anybody helping out a charity organization, that anybody who even does one service hour is developing a charity organization. That should be considered under the scope of today's debate, right? So let's really talk about what development, first of all, means, right? Let's define development. Development is actively expanding, is actively positively contributing to an organization, is actively helping and changing.
And stop time for a minute. Judges, in the first speech, we asked them to provide a definition. First speaker only provided a definition of the creation of an organization. We asked them to define development. I'm not looking to get away with this. This is a brand new definition. It changes the debate.
Hey, sorry, judges. If you actually address the first speech as creating and managing positions, so.
I'm just literally going to semantics at this point. I'm not offering a new definition. I'm using semantics dictionary stuff to support our prior definition.
Yeah, we're listening, but we will not interrupt. Yeah, keep going, please.
All right, sounds good. I'll start time again in 3, 2, 1. But yeah, just really simply on this, who develops McDonald's more? A manager or somebody in an executive structure, or somebody flipping burgers at McDonald's? Does somebody flipping burgers at McDonald's make administrative changes to McDonald's structure that positively impact the company's revenue? Does somebody flipping burgers at McDonald's change the company's operations, change its menu so that they have more profits? We don't think so, and that's the same principle should apply to charity organizations. We think the only people actually developing charity organizations are management, are people that create charity organizations, and thus developing a charity organization only means that people who are in management structures, people who create charity structures, should be considered on the scope of the resolution and should have the consideration of college admissions taken away from them. Once again, we don't think it's fair for us on Gov to actually defend, taking away college admissions as an incentive for people to participate in charity in general. We think charity is a good thing, right? We think that colleges should reward people for that, and we think there's no practical reason why that would be the case. And we think that fundamentally that having us defend that is just simply unfair in today's debate, right? If you think that our definition is more equitable, you should give us a round anyways, because opposition's really just unfairly weighed the round against us if we have to debate under their definitions. And so that's the first voter issue. If you think that development means what we say it is, just actively contributing and helping, then you should vote for us in today's debate, right? Let's leave all that aside for a second and talk about the actual substance of the debate. Let's say for that development encompasses all sort of charity activity, right? Let's first of all talk on the level of practical outcomes, right? So let's see what happens under the side of government when we actually bar charity incentives, people from being incentivized to actually create charity organizations, right? So we see that if you pass this resolution, there are two categories of people, right? Number one, people who create charities, and number two, people who participate in charities and don't create charities themselves, right? Let's talk about people who create charities, right? We think this is a widespread practice in the status quo. We think a lot of people do this because it's simply the way you get to Ivy schools at this point, right? Ivy League schools and those top tier schools that people are always striving for, top prep schools, top up everywhere, right? they want somebody to actually show their demonstrated interest, show that they're committed to the activity, show that they have incentive impetus on their own, show that they're proactive. And the easiest way for people to do that is to go ahead and create a charity in the status quo. So we see that this is a widespread activity, and that furthermore, that a lot of these charities are not actually going ahead and doing anything. They're not actually charity for the charity. They're just shell corporations for the sake of missions. We see that that's harmful. We eliminate all of this on the status quo, so we already win in that, right? But let's talk about the practical layer of the majority of people who are in the status quo who participate in charity, right? We tell you that fundamentally that this resolution does nothing to change their outcomes, right? We still see that the majority of schools have community service hours as an institution, that people start going to be incentivized to participate in charity for that regard, that all the stuff they tell you about building the character of America's youth, etc., is still flowing through on our side because those incentives still exist in the status quo. People want to be good people in the status quo. People want to get community service hours from their high schools, and limiting the incentive in college will not drastically decrease the amount of people who actually pursue charitable activities because people want to help out. We think people are good, and therefore that. Plus, layer of equity. We think that fundamentally that even if we're talking on the layer of people who have access to charity opportunities, more people have access to charity opportunities in richer, better private schools, and that college is considering that only advantages those who are rich, those who are already advantages in the status quo, and therefore on the layer of equity, if you're talking about people with participating in those charities, and not actually creating them, we still win into this debate. Very proud to propose in Gov. Very, very proud to oppose this practice. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, George, do you think we can spend 3 minutes to make our decision and submit the result? Then we come back to give the oral feedback. Yeah.
Right, sounds good.
GG, do you hear me? Okay, cool. Then we come back in 3 minutes. Okay.